When I played Sekiro for the first time, surprisingly it didn't click with me like the other modern FromSoft games. Finished it and pretty much moved on. But you want to know what it was? I went into it thinking it was a Tenchu successor from FromSoft's previous Ninja series, and from the little I played while I waited, I prepped myself for a real methodical stealth game where I relied on my tools pretty much exclusively. And to me, if I was in combat, then I messed up. Which means, yeah, I would avoid it at all costs and made a habit to be overly passive to everything in the game, from the smallest of enemies to all major bosses. Because of that, I never really understood deflects, how to read enemy patterns, and how to use prosthetic tools. So even though I somehow finished the game back then, I might as well have never played the game since I kinda missed the entire point of it all. But when looking at it through the lens of Onimusha for the second time around, which I'd argue is a larger source of inspiration than Tenchu, Sekiro opens up quite a bit. But first, this is Combat Overview. Here we go over the general controls, the main mechanics, who or what we use them on, and then seeing how it all comes together. We have our trusty katana with this looping combo. No delays, heavies, launchers, or directional attacks. It's pretty straightforward stuff here. Holding attack instead will do this piercing thrust attack. Can combo into it, but that doesn't lead into a finisher like Onimusha did. But it does do chip damage even if they block it. It isn't used as a spacing option like Onimusha. Well, not for me anyways, never really used it in neutral like that. But the thrust attack is a lot better punish tool for those guaranteed openings instead of a single slash that won't lead into a full combo, since they'll either dodge soon after or block it. And you want to know what it was, I gave it away that it was definitely inspired by Onimusha. Holding square will absorb nearby pickups. It doesn't have the depth to it like the Oni Gauntlet, how it'll taunt and aggro enemies for some risk-reward decision making. So they kinda just toss it in there just to do it, which is totally fine. I just thought it was pretty funny. Onto defenses, a familiar step dodge. It covers all angles and there's no limit for spamming it. It does have full iframes on it, which, yeah, you can use it like a roll, like in Souls games to an extent, avoiding attacks with well-timed full iframe dodges. But I would highly recommend you deflect more than not at all, which is how I played my first time. And it might seem kind of broken right now how I'm describing it. Can mash this out with no end lag or stamina to limit you. Well, we'll get into that a bit later. We got ourselves a block. It won't lock you in place so you can move around a bit. It doesn't autocorrect you towards oncoming attacks like Onimusha, so you gotta face them on your own, which isn't a problem. No chip damage towards your health to worry about, and you can hold it as long as your posture isn't broken. It can take some hits, making it a pretty reliable tool. But rely on it too much will break your posture, leaving you wide open. To avoid that from happening, you can time your guard correctly to do a deflect. Still does a bit of posture damage to yourself, but would do massive posture damage to that enemy in return, which also leads into a counter slash follow-up to really continue the pressure, if they're still standing, that is. Your guard can cancel your basic attacks to get this deflect on reaction, but only the startup. So it'll let you backtrack in those last second moments, but once you attack, then you're attacking. You gotta let that follow through finish first before your guard comes up. Cool thing is this applies to every enemy that uses blades, even bosses too, which yeah, makes for some funny interactions. Overall, timing deflects isn't as strict like Onimusha's Isen counters, which doesn't mean things are easy in Sekiro, because enemies have way more mobility, have more complicated attack patterns with delays to rapid fire strikes, then add sweeps, vertical attacks, thrusts, command grabs, and the fact they can deflect as well, which we'll get into a bit later. But yeah, even if they're lightning fast, they do have noticeable, well-telegraphed animations for every attack. But oh man, you gotta be a lot more twitchy compared to Onimusha's slower paced methodical encounters, that's for sure. So there's quite a bit to manage here, and that demands a lot of skill on your end. And speaking of those wild options of theirs, Sekiro has another mechanic from a 20-year-old action game in these red attacks. They're called perilous attacks here, and yep, they're unblockable. There's thrust attacks, and this works the same way ours does, how it'll pierce through your guard. You can deflect it, but the best way to deal with these is by using the mech counter. You gotta dodge towards the danger, but trust me, it's super satisfying. Even bosses will toss these out too, and again, it's damn satisfying. There's also sweeps. To avoid these, you gotta jump over them. There's even a head stomp follow-up by jumping again when close enough to deal extra posture damage. And lastly, the command grabs. There's no jump invul to these, like in fighting games for example, so you really gotta be out of its range a good bit beforehand by preemptively jumping away, running, or using well-timed step dodges. Looking at the HUD, the red meter is our health, but most importantly, this yellow meter in the middle is our posture. The entire game revolves around this. And both you and your opponent have a posture meter to manage. Kinda reminds me of Neo 1, which came out 2 years prior, how both you and your enemy can see each other's stamina and need to play off that to get rid of it, and once broken, they'll be opened up for a major punish. But stagger, stun, break mechanics have been a thing before action games, so a fun mechanic is a fun mechanic. Either way, posture builds up when taking hits, either by blocking them or by tanking them with your face. Slowly, it'll add up for the both of you, and eventually, your posture is kinda looking maxed out, on the brink of being shattered. As long as you stay on point, deflecting successfully, you'll do just fine. But mess up once, then it'll open you up. Now, to avoid even having so much buildup and being this close to being shattered in the first place, what you need to know is that actions from swinging your katana, using skills, prosthetic tools, jumping, head stomps, dodging, deflecting, and mech counters will all prevent it from recovering. So mashing attacks to spamming those full iframe dodges will keep your posture pretty high if you're not careful. Holding block, however, will speed up its recovery extremely fast if you find the opening. This seems a bit backwards to me though. In Demon Souls, for example, guarding will have your stam recover slowly, since you're deciding between guarding those enemies' attacks or dropping a shield for faster stamina recovery. Which yeah, leaves you open, but that's why it works. Or in Resident Evil 6, where going prone lying completely still is one of the best ways to refill stam. Again, leaves you open, but that's your trade-off for faster resource management. So the balance becomes the more vulnerable you leave yourself, the better the recovery. But once you add movement or actions from walking, sprinting, blocking, or attacking, these additional variables stack on top of each other, slowing that process down. It works like that here and is very balanced, but it's just a me thing where guarding shouldn't speed up recovery since, while you're blocking, you already have a failsafe to fall back on if you mess up. Again, you can walk around while blocking too, and it doesn't lock you in place for some risky decision making either. Maybe crouching would have been a better option, but yeah. Anyways, moving on. Enemies can recover their posture too. Theirs will recover pretty quick on its own during the early stages of a fight, if you're not on top of them with constant pressure. Now to do that, landing hits will slowly add to that buildup, same way it does for ours, and deflecting their attacks will add to that process a good bit more. So a mix of well-placed, consistent barrage of attacks, reacting to their deflects to answer back with your own deflects, or head stomps, mech counters too, plus the use of prosthetic tools to stuff out their options, is all going to make quick work of them. And once you max out the pressure, this will instantly open them up for a death blow. And no matter how much health they have left, it'll take out that entire health bar right then and there. You do have full iframes during death blows like Ninja Gaiden's OTs. It will either have nearby enemies step back, which does interrupt their attacks, and if they do manage to swing, it'll just phase right through you. We also have an aerial death blow. They don't need to be posture broken to pull this off. Just as long as they're airborne, you can anti-air with this to make quick work of them. Now when it comes to those larger enemies, from mini to major bosses specifically, once their health reaches around the halfway mark, their posture recovery takes a noticeable dive. It pretty much stops altogether from what I can tell. So yeah, eventually you'll chop them down by emptying their health or filling up their posture first, which opens them up for the death blow. They will have multiple phases to them too, so there's going to be some good high risk, high reward, skillful plays, staying on the aggressive, constantly and consistently punishing their patterns with correctly timed dodges, deflects, cure counters, head stomps, prosthetic tools, and so on. Speaking of which, prosthetic tools. These are pretty solid situational options for everything. Shurikens can one-hit those weaker enemies like monkeys and wolves. Not too bad either to chip away weaker enemies while you're undetected. It even anti-airs those jump-happy or airborne enemies, interrupting whatever they're trying to set up. Umbrella is a shield that covers you in all directions, compared to our block, which doesn't. It can stop projectiles from bullets, of course, but also magic from what I can tell. It blocks these larger orbs and this full beam. It also works as an automatic deflect, which has a larger window, making it easier to pull those off with the umbrella. You can even hold it to block multiple hits back to back. The axe, doing a powerful hyper armor slam, its main use is to destroy wooden shields. I even use it to get bigger punishes over a thrust attack when bosses recoil after taking enough damage, or when I jump over sweeps. I'll just land with a heavy hit. The firecracker with its close range spread works as a great crowd control tool, and it even interrupts as well. It's pretty useful against beast animal enemy types, from horses to this blazing bull. There's a few more, but you can see just how versatile these are. Not only do they work on regular enemies, but on major bosses too. And when you use them all for their best roles, it's pretty hype. Leads into experimentation like Mega Man's Busters in that way. How you can hard counter bosses or get a large punish off an opening. The tools don't break the bosses like Mega Man can, how they'll either two-shot them or set up infinite loops with no real back and forth. It's more balanced than that. Yeah, it also reminds me of Castlevania in that way. These prosthetic tools are pretty much sub-weapons. Varied attack options for those situational uses to counter specific enemy types and certain groupings, and the fact these run on spirit emblems too, which are limited amount, having you pick and choose when to toss these out. Again, just like hearts in Castlevania. Now, it is a lot to work with, knowing when to use which option at what time. And if you do end up dying, it's not over yet, because you do have resurrections to lean back on, reviving you on the spot with some health to work with. And even then, it's not over, because if you learn from your mistake, it can stay on top of them, just being consistent. Once you beat one of the phases, getting that death blow, not only does it reset your posture, heal you a good bit, but it also returns one of your revives. Kinda reminds me of Fury a bit. It works the same way there. Even then, it's still going to be a task, having to take on all these wild enemies and bosses. And that's because it's all on you, right? The game is balanced around your skill and mastery, from knowing patterns, being able to react to all of those perilous attacks on time, your tool usage, and much more. So everything you go into a fight is exactly what you need. Just need to know how to use them. You can't really shortcut your way through things with the numbers game by summoning an army, farming to oblivion, or relying on an overly passive build. You gotta get in there yourself for a real 1v1. And your reward for defeating these major bosses are memories. You can turn them in to permanently increase your attack power. There's also prayer beads, and only mini bosses drop these, which makes it a good idea to explore to find them for more fun challenges. And once you have 4 at once, you can combine them to increase your health and posture permanently as well. There are skills to buy. Don't worry too much about getting all of these. There's only like 2 or 3 that are worth picking up, Mikiri counter being one of them. The rest are passable. There's some to boost all healing items, more spirit emblems on hand, extra posture damage dealt from deflects and Mikiri counters. Really solid passives, which aren't adding to your move list, but I never felt like I was missing a key part of my kit, or felt limited for just using the default moves. Again, what we have is more than enough to beat the game. Everything's just that well balanced. When it comes to enemies, basic soldiers will do overhead swings, tried and true pattern that gets you used to things. Gunmen and archers, you can iframe through their shots, or deflect them as well. These guys with makeshift shotguns, wrapping a bunch of rifles together looks like. Their roll, and as soon as they kneel, they're fired, which follows the same consistent timing, which allows you to perfect dodge through it to get in. These swordsmen, which are doing justice to what Samurai Champloo showed us. They'll do an overhead swing just like the past enemy, but now we'll add a follow-up attack afterwards. or even toss out an actual combo, and occasionally sneak in a thrust attack in there too. So these jump up a tier, getting a little more layered. There's giants that'll hyper armor through your attacks, so even though they move a bit slow, you can't get away with mashing around them. Gotta pick your moments and be ready to deflect their wide telegraph swings. Lone shadows. You'll see these guys quite a bit, so you want to know what they do. For one, they'll rush you down and start a fight as soon as they see you. Now, if they ever lean forward, while having their katana stretched out to their side, they will do a rapid 1-2 combo, which sets up easy deflects for a good chunk of posture damage. There's a lot more different enemies with very unique patterns to go over, but here's a rule of thumb that Sifu taught me. So as you attack enemies, they will actually deflect you just like you can to them. You know what happened by that orange hit spark compared to the yellow golden clinks we see most of the times. There's also a different lower sound effect. This lets you know they got a deflect on you. From here, see what they do. This enemy here, for example, that we're testing this out on, I'm sure was built for this very thing to get us to notice it, since they'll just back away every time. So you won't get punished just yet early on for mashing. But the basic soldier would do an overhead attack after a deflect. The swordsman will either do an instant jab or do a thrust having a Mercury counter. Red knights with dual blades that will put a bit of delay to their swings to try to trip you up. So when they deflect you, wait a tad bit for that soldier charge of theirs, and they will follow up with a 2-hit combo into a thrust attack. They do this every time for easy posture damage. Snake Eyes most times will do this forward kick into firing at you. You just gotta dodge through it and there you go. And the Lone Shadows will do a 4-hit combo, pause, ready up a kick, that's a thrust attack, so yeah, Mercury counter it. Also, the thrust attack is a pretty solid way to force these deflects out of enemies, kinda acting like its own version of a taunt to get enemies to react, which is pretty cool that you can do that if you want. So yeah, even though these are regular enemies, they do give a lot of back and forth, having you learn pattern recognition and being able to react to what they do. It did catch me off guard, this thing, but again, I played Sekiro wrong the first time back in 2019. But this time around, we've learned a few things. Mini bosses are here, like I mentioned for the prayer beads. There's an elite swordsman. He really tests your reactions. Watch for that glare and he'll toss out 2 lightning fast slashes. Just deflect them back to back and neutral you go. Simple, but it really tests your reactions and deflecting skills. Or you can use the umbrella to mess them up for free. Okami leader, what you can do is wait for them to jump. You can shuriken to knock them down, or instantly take them out with an anti-air death blow. And yeah, you can do the same thing to the lesser versions throughout the same level too. That's some genius enemy design for you. Also, long arm centipede, whose thing is to lay down a barrage of attacks. And yeah, he'll toss out 4 swings, pause, and then follow up with 6 more. As long as you have that rhythm of theirs down, you can destroy the posture pretty quick. And they mix in sweeps in there at times. Again, you can use your shield to help out. The Lone Shadows are mini bosses as well sometimes, with their own gimmick added. But they still do the same 4-hit combo into the thrust ender when they deflect your offense. And one of my favorite mini bosses of the entire game is the Armored Warrior. He tanks your hits and is super slow, but hits like a damn truck. So you can't really stagger him, and again, you can't really mash either. But if you notice, there's a ledge overlooking a nice view. Maybe this guy wants to take a closer look, right? So with the pole arm to rip off armor, using your axe after his flailing combo for heavy punish, you'll slowly build up his posture to get that death blow. It won't kill him, but it'll push him away, and yeah, it'll break those wooden guardrails, sending him over, falling like a sack of rocks. And then, boom, you'll hear him slam at the bottom, even shaking the whole screen because of it. For major bosses, there's the Guardian Ape, very fast and hard hitting, tosses out command grabs or a sweep to jump over. The second phase is a surprise. Main combos you want to look out for is this 5-hit string of theirs, and deflecting that final blow will knock them off their balance, toppling them over. This opens them up long enough to use their pole arm to poke and rip out the centipede, doing a solid amount of posture damage. And when they're about to do that blood-curdling yell, You can run away, but you can also use the umbrella to guard it. The Divine Dragon is more of a platforming boss, using a grappling hook and lightning reversals, creating a pretty nice spectacle fight. And that sword is very popular in games, huh? We just saw it in Onimusha, it's in Neo 2, Meta Knight has it, it's in the Final Fantasy 1 opening, and yeah. I know it's based off a real life sword, but it's pretty cool to see it referenced over multiple games. Owl is easily one of my favorite bosses because he has the same tools. He taught us everything we know after all. From tossing shurikens, little items to stop you from healing, smoke bombs, firecrackers, and yeah, some stuff we don't have too, which gives him his own style. He'll even Mikiri counter your thrust attacks. Those little details, you know. Genichiro is a rival throughout the game. He has multiple forms and we'll rematch him throughout the game for some true 1v1 showdowns. It's cool you can actually beat him in the very beginning too, just like in Demon Souls, even though you're meant to lose. But yeah, as the game goes on, you two will cross paths a few times, and each time will add some more tricks along the way. From the grounded fight in the tutorial, for him tossing out lightning bolts, which yeah sets up the lightning reversal, returning to sender, stunning him, letting you do massive damage. And when you get these back to back, oh does it feel good. There's a lot more bosses, but they mix it up quite a bit with their patterns and how you approach them. There's even more bosses depending on the story routes you pick. The Shura ending is kind of my favorite right now because it lets me beat the game in a single session, and you get to fight Emma and Ishin Ashina are pretty amazing boss fights, having true amazing 1v1 sword-based fights. And if you don't like this ending and decide to set up a longer alternative one, you'll unlock another version of the estate where you get to rematch Al again with way more attacks to learn and master again, really making for an intense fight. Or the Demon Hatred, which is the flame lurker of Sekiro. You've been fighting for the most part humanoid-sized enemies, so when this beast shows up with high mobility, its larger size and just hits pretty hard, yeah, it's a left turn. It's a secret boss, so expect a challenge, but it's an amazing fight just as you expect. Also, grappling hooks is used for traversal throughout the game, but it plays a unique role to get you in with those larger bosses, which also helps dodge certain attacks too. But yeah, from standard enemies to major bosses, they all have unique patterns and a few ways to go about them. Can deflect, Mikiri counter, the step dodge, and all that, right? But there's also skills, items, and prosthetic tools to help to find that right counter to see what they're vulnerable to. Really incentivizes experimentation to see what everything can do. And that's Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. It truly is one of the best games ever made. It's a very classically designed game with a lot of connections to Onimusha, Zoe 2, Fury, Neo, Mega Man, and Castlevania. It's become one of my favorite games of all time because of that. And just like those games, Sekiro is built around the same principles of mastery. Just learning the multiple aspects of the game inside and out, discovering how they all interact with each other in a few ways over time through experimentation. We already went over that to a large extent, so what more is there to say? The game kind of speaks for itself, and to me it's basically perfect from top to bottom, making it a timeless classic. So if you like Onimusha for Isens, learning the timings on a wide variety of enemies to pull it off, bosses now included, or Rising Revengeance for that ninja boss rush action, which also has an emphasis on counters, right? Fury for those multi-phased, mechanically varied bosses with a revive mechanic. Hell, tossing Sifu in there too for similar reasons, why not? Or even classic action games from Mega Man to Castlevania for those sub-weapons, giving us unique tools for situational uses to counter certain attacks or enemy types and bosses. So yeah, whatever action game you like from the old school days to the modern era or anywhere in between, you'll find something here.